Tonight, we're going to talk about the kind of the second half of the creation story. I call it the biological creation. 2 weeks ago we talked about the astrophysical creation, which was the physics and chemistry pretty much of the creation, the first 4 days. And we saw that if you look at what science has observed, and science concluded 85 years ago that the universe had a beginning based on Einstein's equations and Edwin Hubble's observation. But the Bible had been saying that for a long time, that in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And so as we went through the science part of it and then came back and looked at the scriptures. Now, one of the things that I hope I'm teaching in this is the traditional interpretations of the scriptures sometimes are a little bit out of date, maybe 400 years out of date, because since the King James Version was translated, all of this information we know about the universe, all of the astrophysics and even the biology that we know about the universe has been discovered since then. So you look at, for instance, my King James Version here, 400 years old as far as the translation. So what we're doing as we go through, we're going back to the original scriptures. And we're looking at what the ancient Hebrew words said. And they had very few words, so they had to have there were general words. And so you had to really dig in there and get the context before you could understand what it was trying to tell us. And we ran into some of that in the astrophysical creation 2 weeks ago. One thing I want to remind you about, we talked about the Big Bang. I guess some people still say the Big Bang is a theory, but personally I think it's, particularly Einstein's part of it, is so well verified that our whole space program is based on it. But scientific theories have to be verifiable. Scientists call it falsifiable. You can take a scientific theory, particularly a physics, chemistry, thermodynamics, the hard sciences I call them. You can take those theories and you can test them. You can run experiments, you can make observations, you can test them. And if they fail a test, even one, Einstein said, you can prove me right 1,000 times, but all you got to do is prove me wrong one time and my theory is no good. So one kink in the armor, so to speak, of a scientific theory, and it has to be redone. It has to either be scrapped or reconstituted. And I guarantee you, well, I know this for a fact, there's been hundreds of scientific theories that have fallen apart because of that reason. They must be verifiable. And if you can't run an experiment, if it's impossible to run an experiment, then the theory also fails because then it's not falsifiable. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go on today because some of the things we think and believe about how the universe came about, how life came about, how even mankind came about are theory. They're based on some observations, fossil record and stuff like that, but there's still a lot of theory involved. And I got a little book up here somewhere. It's called The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin. It's good. Everybody ought to read this. I mean, you can see it doesn't take but a few hours to read it. And the thing I like about Charles Darwin, and not particularly his theory, is the fact that he was honest. He said, man, there's a lot of problems with this theory. And we're going to look at some of those today. And not that we're going to spend a lot of time on Darwin, but we're going to compare what the scriptures say against the pretty much the widely held beliefs about how these biological events occurred. And that's what we're going to do today. And you can make up your mind, what you think is right. And I try to give you the You know, everybody's got an opinion about the facts, but basically what I'm going to tell you is what has been widely verified by observation or experiment. And here's another thing. The Big Bang, not a very popular idea in particularly the Southern Baptist churches, but a lot of the evangelical Christian churches don't like the idea of the Big Bang because they think that it gives ample time for evolution to occur. We may talk a little bit about that, but what I'm going to tell you, I got some bad news for you. There's 3 other Big Bangs in here. And they're on the biological side. So let's get started. Scientists tell us, and I believe they're right, that the first life on Earth dates back to about 3.8 billion years ago. There's some evidence, and of course the dating methods are, they have some pretty good error bands. But 3.8 billion years ago, the first life appeared, and we talked about them. You remember the pictures of the prokaryotic single-cell little bacteria that lived in the oceans and the shallow seas around the planet. And actually, this is Big Bang number 2. And the reason it is because, all right, I don't have a slide for this, but try to remember this in your head. Big Bang number 1 is when the universe came into existence, 13.78 billion years ago. And we saw that the scriptures pretty much follow science right down to some pretty excruciating detail about how the earth was covered in darkness, how the water cycle came about. That to me, that's just astounding, that the scriptures describe the water cycle so clearly. I mean, it's just like somebody was writing a science textbook. And the water cycle is important because it's the only place in the universe is right here where it exists. Somebody might say, well, there's billions of planets out there. Surely there's one with a water cycle. Well, there may be, but I'll keep saying it's the only place in the universe with a water cycle until somebody brings me a paper where they've discovered a planet with a water cycle on it. The minute temperature differences and distances from the star, I mean, what it takes to make a water cycle is astounding. God mentioned it in the Bible. And then he talked about the land becoming covered with water. Scientists agree with that. Then the land came up from beneath the water. That's how land forms. Tectonic action and volcanic action. And somewhere along the way, these prokaryotes came into existence. Now, why do you suppose I call them Big Bang number 2? Well, 3.9 billion years ago, an event called the Late Heavy Bombardment, LHB. Go look it up. Late Heavy Bombardment. Apparently the Earth or a bunch of space debris passed through the solar system, and there was a lot of it out there, and still is actually. And the Earth was just pummeled with big meteorites. Any one of them would have extinguished life right by itself. But the Earth for maybe a million years, maybe that long, was just pummeled by these big meteorites. That's what the scientists tell us from the geological observations they've made. So 3.9 billion years ago, life wasn't possible on the Earth. It was basically molten, okay, 1,000 degrees on the surface. So here comes life 3.85 billion years ago. What's that, 50 million years? There's a big discussion in all of biology about how long it took for the first life to form on Earth. Science tells us it was a very short period of time. But you look at what it takes to make life. We're not going to get into it tonight. We're going to get into it when we do the thing on evolution. But that little prokaryote, he looks kind of simple, but he is some kind of complex. You know, he's got DNA, he's got lots of... He could not have come about that quick. Even this guy right here, Mr. Darwin, would agree. You know, he says long periods of time, little bitty changes, long periods of time, little bitty changes. Well, that life showed up on Earth like that, in the snap of a finger, geologically speaking. So one of Darwin's predictions would have been that life would have taken a long time to show up after the late heavy bombardment. But it showed up like that. Boom, 3.85 billion years ago. That's Big Bang number 2. Now here comes Big Bang number 3. Well, it was about 570 million years ago that animal life, 570 million years ago, it's called the Ediacaran period. It's not on any of my slides. Ediacaran, in Australia, I think. And they found a deposit, and it had 4 phyla of life in it, a strata, about 30 million years. Now, those 4 phyla no longer exist. So these animals weren't ancestors to anything that exists today. But they were the first animals. Okay, now we had some plants. In fact, I think there was only one of the 4 phyla, maybe 2, that were actually animals. The other 2 were some kind of plant, some kind of mushroom or slime or something like that. The Ediacaran period, okay. You go below Ediacaran, you don't find anything that even looks like an animal. So here's a few little animals showing up. 543 million years ago, all these animals, well, not him, but all of the animals that you saw in that one slide exploded onto the scene. They call it the Cambrian explosion. In a period of less than 10 million years, which is a very short period of time, geologically speaking. Need to write this down, Cambrian explosion. 50 phyla. Now, there's only 39 phyla existing right now. 50 phyla are found in this Cambrian thing, which isn't but that big, you know. Animal life exploded. Every animal phyla is in the Cambrian explosion, 543 million years ago, including us. Anybody know what phyla we're in? Any of you students back there? We're in what's called chordata because we have spinal cords. Well, cats, dogs, fish, squirrels, I mean, so they're all in this same phyla. That shows you how basic this classification is. Anything with a spinal cord, we're cousins to it, at least according to the biological classifications. Anything with a spinal cord. 50 phyla, only 39 now. So 11 of them have gone extinct over that period of time. This is Big Bang number 3. Again, Dr. Darwin, and he says, and I'll read it right out of his book if you'd like. If numerous species belonging to the same genera, now genera is like wolves and foxes and dogs, and you know, it's like that much. If numerous species belonging to the same genera or families have really started into life at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of evolution through natural selection. Right about the time Darwin published his book, in 1859, that's when they discovered they had just discovered this Cambrian fossil field. They just discovered it, and he was trying to make sense of it because it didn't fit his model at all. And you know, all these things just, boom, they were here. His theory would have predicted eons of time. And evolutionists and non-evolutionists too, have been trying to understand it, trying to figure out why life appeared on Earth fully formed. I mean, these weren't bacteria. I mean, these were animals that had fins and flippers and teeth and digestives. I mean, these things, not a whole lot different. Even fish were in there. So, the Cambrian explosion. Big Bang number 3. Now, so we're at 543 million years. Then it starts to get interesting. And all the Cambrian stuff was sea life, okay? Basically indicating that the first animal life on Earth came out of the sea. You know, that's what most biologists would tell you, that animal life came out of the sea. That's where it started, and that's where it came from. But about 65 million years ago, can y'all see that pretty well? Something bad happened. Now, this meteorite, about 16 miles across, hit down on the Yucatan Peninsula, not far from here, less than 1,000 miles from right here. So if we'd been dinosaurs 65 million years ago, we would have been in big trouble. And it kicked up a cloud of dust, and the explosion must have been like 1,000 atom bombs. You know, I mean, it's amazing what a ruckus this thing produced when it came through our atmosphere. And it blackened the sky for thousands of years. All of the animals that weren't killed by direct cause, all the leafy plants began to die. All the animals that you can imagine what it must have been like. Remember that picture I showed you of Spokane after Mount St. Helens? It probably looked like that. All over the world. So the dinosaurs were gone. They couldn't handle it. Their food source was gone. They died. The interesting thing about it to me is that's only one of 5 times something very similar to that has happened. They call them mass extinction events. And they have occurred through the years since the Cambrian explosion in 540 million years ago. And they have, depending on, and we're not going to talk about them because it takes up too much time, but depending on which one, I mean, as little as 25% of all the genera up to 90% of all the genera. And this one called the Chicxulub extinction event wiped out almost all of the land animals and a lot of the sea animals. So, and you say, well, what's the big deal about that? Well, that's a big problem for evolution because they basically had to start all over again. And so the time that Dr. Darwin counted on is just being taken away from him. You know, there's hardly anything we find in the fossil record that you can trace back to a long period of time. So this is a problem more for Darwinian evolution than it is for anything else. And we're going to see what the scripture says about all this in a minute. This lady here is called Ardipithecus ramidus. Now, it hadn't been long since they discovered her. And one of the great things about Ardipithecus is the fact that they found almost a complete skeleton. And 4.5 million years old. And there were a few species they found since around Ardipithecus that were a little bit older. But y'all notice anything about Ardipithecus that would make you think she's special? She's walking around on 2 legs. Does anybody remember Lucy? Remember Lucy? Jenny and I actually saw Lucy, didn't we, Jen, in the Museum of Natural History in New York. She's about this high, ugly little thing. But she was not totally bipedal like this animal is. She walked around, she's kind of like a trained chimpanzee, and she would get down and knuckle walk like the great apes. But she was upright enough to where they check their brains, the skull. You can tell when an animal is an upright walking animal because the way their brains are oriented is different. They got to have the balance and all that. So here's the problem. Lucy was 3 million years old. And for decades, because she was found back in the 50s, for decades, Lucy was the missing link. And hey, who could argue? She looked like she was halfway between a chimpanzee and a human being. But this gal messed the whole show up because this Ardipithecus was found and dated to 4.5 million years ago. 1.5 million years before Lucy, and Lucy wasn't even bipedal. So it says that now Ardipithecus is one of the oldest bipedal fossils we have. So here's Big Bang number 4, or yeah, number 4.
She said, where was she found?
Ethiopia. In fact, most of the hominid fossils are found in Ethiopia, and that makes for a good discussion too, because Ethiopia's up in northeast Africa, and I did look at the boundaries of the Garden of Eden one time, and Ethiopia is right outside the gate. Okay, but we won't worry about Ethiopia right now. Ardipithecus ramidus. Now, this, I know you can't see this. All the little colored things are different animals that were considered bipedal. Now, none of these things are human, okay? And except the red ones, okay? You see the red ones up there? Those are guys that look a lot like us, and they've been around a good while. They've been around for 2 or 3 million years. You got Homo erectus, you got Homo habilis, you got Homo rudolfensis. There's about 8 or 9 of them. And these are animals that looked a lot. I mean, if you looked at their skeletons, you couldn't. I mean, their heads look a little different. They had, like Neanderthal man had a big, heavy brow, and this is a big surprise to a lot of Christians, particularly that these kind of things lived before Adam. Okay. Questions like, were they Adam? None of these things were humans except that last one on the upper left-hand corner. That's Homo sapien. Homo Neanderthal, or Neanderthal man, and Homo sapiens coexisted for years, maybe 10,000 years. And Homo Neanderthal went extinct about 32,000 years ago. We actually have some DNA from them. We found some DNA. We found some fossils that were so well preserved. They were buried in caves, and the weather was cool, and they didn't dry out, and they extracted DNA from them. One of them, 32,000 years ago, compared it to humans, 99.5. But that doesn't make you a human. It's got to be 100. So they're not ancestors of humans. There's theories about whether they interbred. There's all kinds of theories, and there's all kinds of genetic research being done to check them out. And I saw something here not long ago where the Russians believe they are part of Neanderthal. Well, they can believe that if they want to, but. And it's possible. If they had bred, they would have produced an offspring. I mean, they're that close. Now, that little red box up at the top, you can't see the scale on it, but that's about a Homo sapien came into being about 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago. Something strange happened about 50,000 years ago. I remember watching a television program on the Discovery Channel, and there was a female anthropologist, and I didn't get her name or anything because it never struck me that what she was saying was that important until she said this. She said, 50,000 years ago, everything changed. And what she was talking about was for 200,000 years, Homo sapien, or 150,000 years, Homo sapien lived in wherever they lived, Northeast Africa. And all animals, whether it's a spider or a bee or a chimpanzee, have technology. Birds build fancy nests, bees build honeycombs. I can't even draw it. They can build these perfect little things. And each one of these animals, as they came along, their technology kind of took a incremental increase. Can you imagine, Because the guys in red up there had bigger brains. But the thing that the anthropologists noticed about them was they would take this incremental jump and then they'd pretty much level out. They'd stay pretty much the way they were. Well, 50,000 years ago, and evolutionists say, well, there was some evolutionary change in the brain. And they may be right, I don't know. But whatever happened, the technology of Homo sapien started taking off like a rocket. He was building houses, he could speak, he played games, he did art, started drawing on caves. And one thing they found of all these finds of these early Homo sapiens, well, they call them Homo sapiens sapien. They added another one, they consider them a subspecies, which is what we're going to talk about in a second. Well, let me show you one of them. There's Homo sapien, an archaic Homo. He looks like the lead drummer in a rock band. And but these new guys, 50,000 years ago, I mean, they're like I say, they're doing art. They've developed language. They're building different kinds of houses. They have hunting skills that these, they don't use rocks and they build bow and arrows, I mean, they're doing things that their cousins, this guy, never did. And now they're riding around in BMWs, so here's what Homo sapien sapien looks like. I mean, that's him right there. Okay, so that's where we are. And a lot of the difference has been assigned to the behavior of this animal. Morphologically, they don't look very different. In fact, you probably couldn't tell the difference if you saw two skeletons. But up here is where it counts, and that's what these guys had. So that happened like 50,000 years ago. And then right after that happened, they were all located right there in one bunch right in Northeast Africa, around the Sinai Peninsula, over to the Mediterranean Sea, up a little bit into Iraq and up in there, in that little area. And all of a sudden they started leaving. They would head north, northeast. They went in all directions. And eventually, over the next 15 or 20,000 years, now they think this happened about 50,000 years ago because there are no fossils of Homo sapien anywhere in the earth outside of Ethiopia older than 42,000 years. So that's how they kind of date it, that they call it the out of Africa theory. And they went, and if you look at the map, where they went across and had to leave is you could almost throw a rock across there. All these people migrated out. Some of them went to Europe, some of them went toward Australia. Actually, some of the oldest human remains are in Australia. They made a straight path to Australia, it seems like. Okay, y'all got that? I mean, that's the scientific story. Okay. Now, what does the scripture say about all this? if anything. I'm sure it says something. Let's see what it says. Genesis 1:20. Now this is where we left off. We left off at the fourth creation day, which we dated. Let me get my note here. We dated that at about 700 million years. Because you remember, it was the first time that you could see the sky. Scientists say between 700 million and a billion years ago, the sky finally cleared up for the first time. All this garbage had been in the air, and water vapor, looked like a cloudy day. Finally, with all the oxygen in the air and all the dust and the tectonic and volcanic activity was settling down, all of a sudden the sky turned blue. Of course, that just gave a big, giant help to the leafy plants that existed at that time. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." Now, to me, this is a kind of a executive summary, all right? You remember in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which we know the universe had a beginning, the heavens, Shamayim in the Hebrew tongue. This is kind of a statement like that, you know. God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly." I just figured this out a day or two ago. The moving creature that hath life. Now, what is that telling us? It's translated into the English as "bring forth." It's used several times in the scriptures, and that's, you know, it's kind of what it means. It means from there they came forth, okay. But this is interesting because, you know, we think about God and we think about the creation. We think about creating. God, you know, so it's the hardest thing for Christians to get over is the fact that this all wasn't snapping your fingers and waving your hands. The whole astrophysical creation was a step-by-step process governed by the physical laws, which I said was the greatest creation God ever made, and I think that's true. Not a bunch of hand-waving and puffs of smoke. Things went according to the physical laws. All right, where does it say the life came from? Can y'all read that? The waters. Do you remember back a minute ago I said, where was the Cambrian explosion? Where did it come from? The sea. Verse 20 is nothing but a recap of the Cambrian explosion. And I'll tell you why I know that. Let the waters bring forth abundantly. What do you remember about the Cambrian explosion? I mean, it's only been 5 minutes, so surely you remember something. 50 phyla, right? In the Cambrian explosion. 39 today. Wouldn't you call that abundantly? I mean, it was more than there are now. Different phyla, different kinds of life. Bring forth abundantly from the waters. I mean, you really can't put a statement together, certainly in Hebrew, much better than that describes the Cambrian explosion. I dare you to do it, okay? Now, here's another thing you got to remember. 3,500 years ago, there were no biological classifications. Species, genera, or genus, what are the other ones? Family, order, blah, 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 all the way down to Luca, last universal common ancestor. That's a man-made concoction, a couple of hundred years old. So when old Moses was sitting out there under that cactus or whatever he lived under, he didn't describe animal life that way. He didn't even describe them as mammals and fish and birds. Here's how he described them. Let me find my notes. he described them, the moving creature that hath life. The Hebrew word is sheretz. And I've studied that word a lot, and it means a lot of little teeming, schooling, swarming animals. It could be anything from a school of fish to a swarm of bees. But that's why when people are kind of picking at the word a little bit, they say, well, where are the bees? Where are the insects? Well, here they are. But the Bible wasn't into the genus and the phyla and all of that stuff. And I'm going to show you more of that because there's a lot more of that to come. And it could mean schools of fish. It could mean little bunches of different kind of reptiles. I don't know. And the fowl, okay? You see where it says, and the fowl, that's pronounced oaf, like you would say O-A-F. Again, they only had a few thousand words back there. That means anything that flies. That can be a winged insect, it can be a bird, it can be a bat, it can be a pterodactyl, I guess, what Miles would say, right? I don't know if anybody back there ever saw a pterodactyl, but it means something that flies. It's translated as fowl. That's a good translation, but you can interpret it a lot differently based on what you might learn about the Hebrew language. The fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. Remember when we talked about the firmament of heaven? Rakia is the word, and it means the expanse. It basically means between the surface of the earth and the troposphere. Because when we studied the water cycle, that's exactly what it described. And it's called a firmament. That always bugged me because firmament seems like, this is firmament. And he's talking about the sky, but that's the way King James's monks translated it. But it means this distance, this open space that we call, the atmosphere. Okay. Leanne can't read that red. It said it's a more accurate statement of fact than the predictions of Darwinian evolution. Now, I'm not picking on Darwin tonight. We'll pick on him some other night. But all I'm telling you is that Darwin wouldn't have predicted this. He would not have predicted. He said so himself. I just read it to you. But the Bible said it 3,500 years ago. Now, kind of find that to be a little bit amazing. All right, let's look at Genesis 1:22 or 21. Now, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl, remember, oaf, after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Okay. This word translated whales, which is tenin, is a mistranslation. Number one, at this part in history, there were no whales, there were no mammals. But if you look at the Hebrew word tenin, it doesn't mean whales. It means a large, unknown sea creature. It could be a shark, it could be a plesiosaur, okay? It could be a whale too, but it's not limited to that. The words were general. A big animal in the sea is what tenin means. Now, the King James's bishops, they've been told, hey, it's a whale, so that's what they put in the scripture. Now, and it's not changing the scripture. That's exactly what it means in the Hebrew. You check it out. Then they have one they call every living creature that moveth on the earth, she nephesh ramas. Now, when I tell you every living creature that moves on the earth, that covers a lot of ground, don't you think? Really, when you look at the Hebrew and put it together, it means animals that walk on the ground on all fours. Or on legs, maybe is even a better way to say it. Some animal that's comfortable on legs, walking around on the ground. Man, that could include just about anything you can think of. But let's go on and see. So he's telling us now that there's land animals, okay, in Genesis 21. So the first animals were from the sea. The second kind of animals were land animals. Probably reptiles, be my guess. Because it'd be a stretch to call it a mammal at that point in time because we hadn't talked about birds or some of the other things that came along before them. Now, here's something we don't want to forget. The scriptures repeat 11 times that the plant and animal species came after their kind. The word mean is pronounced mean like mean, M-E-A-N, but it's spelled M-I-Y-N, Hebrew word, and it means from one came another of the same kind. No problem there. 11 times the scripture says, from this one came another of the same kind. Now, Christians say, well, that's scriptural evidence against evolution. And that's, that's from the scripture, that's a pretty strong argument. But most people think it's a very tight thing like just species. And I think it's a little broader than that. Okay, remember they didn't have all these biological classifications. Moses didn't. So mean didn't have some kind of biological definition back in those days. But there is wolves and dogs and stuff like. They're all related, and but they're within a genera. You get past the genera, and then you got more problems. But you really can't get past the genera and keep the context of what is being said in these scriptures. Does everybody follow me on that? Mean, from one kind came another of the same kind. Okay. Now, let's see where we are. Okay, the fossil record generally supports this, offering no compelling evidence that species arose from other kinds. Now, and evolutionists jump up and say, no, that's not right. Lots of evidence. There's a lot of evidence that animal A animal C came from animal A, and there was some animal in between we'll call animal B. In fact, millions of animals like him. And Darwin says, one, and he's talking about objections. One, namely the distinctness of specific forms and they're not being blended together by innumerable, remember that word, innumerable transitional links, is a very obvious difficulty. Now like I say, Darwin's very honest. He says, this theory's got some problems, and he's going through them. So these transitional links not being, as his own word, innumerable is a very obvious problem. Now read on. But just in proportion as this process of extermination has acted on an enormous scale, the whole world, so must the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed be truly enormous. Why then is there not in every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Assuredly, geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory, evolution. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Now remember, he's writing this in 1859. Well, here we are in, 2014. I'm not going to do the math, a long time later. Guess what? We hadn't found them yet. But the fossil record still offers no compelling evidence, certainly not the innumerable, inconceivably great number of transitional forms that Darwin himself, I just read it, says there has to be. The scriptures describe animal groups as swarming, teeming, scurrying, moving about on four legs, every living creature that moves, rather than fish, reptiles, mammals, birds, so on. So part of the problem with trying to match the scriptures with the type of animals that we've seen come down is this terminology problem. And it's a problem we can't fix because these people didn't understand all that stuff that many years ago. Remember I told you that The fact that bacteria was the first living thing on earth is not mentioned in the Bible. Remember that? And you remember the reason why? Wasn't a word for it. Wasn't a concept of it. These people were shepherds. I mean, they lived 3,500 years in the Iron Age. If you start talking about a bacteria, submicroscopic bacteria to them, they look at you like you were crazy. I mean, it just was something that they could not communicate, so it was left out. Everything in the creation story in the Bible is things that these people could see and that they knew about. They understood these words. If you had put in a bunch of stuff they did not understand, you wouldn't have gotten very far with them. Does that make sense to you? That didn't mention dinosaurs. Well, by the time they came along, dinosaurs were extinct. You know, so there you have it. Now, Genesis 1, 22 and 23. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and morning were the fifth day. Hey, we got through one day. But man, the earth is just covered with animals, plants, and we're moving right along. Okay. Genesis 1, 24 and 25. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, the cattle and their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God said it was good. You think he's trying to tell us something in that one? I don't know how many times kind is, mean is mentioned in there, but it's a bunch. But one of the possible interpretations of She, Nephesh, or She, generally it's the living thing, but it can be, when it's in the context of the beast of the earth, She, Eretz, it's like a wild animal. That's kind of the way they used it back in those days. So here we get some little different animals put in. But anyway, God brought forth soulish animals. Now, Nephesh means soulish animal. What is a soulish animal? Anybody know what a soulish animal? What would you guess it would be? Anybody got a pet? Soulish animals are animals that relate to humans. Dogs, cats, whatever. Pigs. No, I'm sorry. I don't know anybody's got a pet pig. I know somebody had a pet chicken one time. Right, Leah? Soulish animals. Okay. Domesticated animals. Then you had behemoth. That sounds like behemoth, you know, probably the root word. Large-bodied animals. Now, this is on the beginning of the sixth day. And these are clearly mammals, okay? I heard a critique about the biblical version one time where they said, well, there were sixth-day mammals appear. They were here before cows and cats and dogs. But if you look back at you know, some of the words, shiretz and ramas, and some of these words that they could easily be in scurries around on the ground on all fours. That's probably mammals in that. So, but here is a specific kind of mammal, behemoth. Could be anything. Could be a horse, could be a hippopotamus, okay? Large-bodied animals, small animals that creep and crawl on the ground. Remes, remes were brought forth as well. Now these are, the remes, R-E-M-E-S, are like squirrels and hares and rats and rodents and things like that. Think, little scurry and small, and probably most of those were mammals. Again, the sequence perfectly matches observed science in a very broad kind of a way because the categories are so general. Now, I threw this up. We can go through it. It shows you the biological descriptions. On one side, shiretz, moving creature that hath life, teeming, swarming, and under biology, that would be a vast array of animals such as fish, reptiles, small mammals, and insects. Things that fly, winged insects and birds. In biology, that'd be birds, insects, and bats, things that fly. Tenine, large unknown sea animals in the scriptures. In biology, it's large fish, whales, possibly plesiosaurs, squid, things like that, big animals in the sea. She nepish ramas, living creatures that move about on legs. Any 2- or 4-legged animal would fit in that walks on the ground. A behemoth, large-bodied animals. Biology would call that cows, horses, hippos, elephants, etc. Remes, creeping things, hares, squirrels, rodents. So you get a feel for how the Hebrews described these things. They didn't call them, with their Latin biological names. They call them scurrying, animals. So it's an important point because there's a lot of people pick at this part of the Scripture because we've got this tree of life and we've got all these things figured out. But the Scriptures do a pretty good job, and they're not at fault because they beat everybody to the punch on how to describe these animals, okay? Okay, and God said, let us make man. Ooh. Hope we got time to get into man. Here we do. In our own image, our own likeness, and let them, man, have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over everything creeping that creepeth on the earth. That pretty much covers everything. Now here's the interesting thing that I never thought about until a few years ago. We think man was created, don't we? I mean, like the universe. Snap your fingers and there's man. I mean, that's what Hollywood tells us. Man was made. You might say he's man-made. The word is asah, A-S-A-H, and it means in Hebrew to take some things and make something else out of it. Remember, we were going to build a dog house. We'd had to get some boards and some sheet metal and, plywood and whatever when we make a dog house. Well, that's what that word means. So man was put together, but he was also formed. It says later in we're not going to get that far, but it says, and God formed man of the dust of the earth. By the way, the word dust is the closest thing in the Hebrew language to elements. It's the very basic building material that they understood. And if you were to say, find me a word that means elements, which they had no idea about an element. And there's a Hebrew word now for elements. It's not the one that Moses used, but that's what it would have been. It would have been the word for dust. But man was formed. He was made. Formed is a very similar thing to make. You take some things and you press him into shape. That's what it means, pressed into shape. Like a sculptor would press theistic evolutionists say, hey, that sounds a lot like evolution to me. And it, might be. Sounds like it to me too. But maybe evolution is not precluded. But all those men's, all those one kind, another kind, it makes a difficult argument for a theistic evolutionist. All right, look at this now. Because this is good. God said, let us make man in our image. All right, what about our image? What is God's image? Does God look like us, you think? I don't think so. John 24, chapter 24, verse 4 said God is a spirit. God has, was it Leonardo or was it Michelangelo that did the thing on the Sistine Chapel? I don't remember where David and God are touching fingers. Who? Okay. Everybody thinks that's what God looks like. He looks like an old grandpa, in a big robe. With some people, I guess, maybe think he's got a big crown on it. That's not God at all. God is a mind. Okay, the Greek word is logos. You can't see God. You never will. But he's out there because he's the guy that created the physical laws we talked about last week. Okay, somebody had to do it. All right, now look. Image, Salim, means from one comes another just alike. In our likeness, I think I got those on notes. The shadow of the original, and demuth is determined likeness, a son from the blood of the father. So if you remember anything, remember that the image and the likeness has nothing to do with the physical attributes. What was different about mankind was the fact that he had some godlike characteristics that none of the other animals had. Good and evil. Man can, would you agree? Man can, now there may be a scale on that, you know, some people might have a wider opinion of what evil is, but everybody that I know believes that there is good and evil in this world. I do. Animals don't believe in good and evil. I mean, a lion catches a gazelle and eats him for dinner. I mean, so what? You know, that's just dinner. I'll go get another one tomorrow. Animal world doesn't have this. All right, conscience. The ability to make complex decisions. I mean, there's a lot of things, and all these things are immaterial, okay? So these are godlike characteristics. And we have been given those godlike characteristics by God. And, but at the same time, He made and formed man. Now, how does that all work? We don't have time to get into that, but I would sure like to tell you about what I think about it. Now, watch out now. Y'all are fixing to catch me. God created man in His own image. So now we got a third thing He created. Man was made, asa, formed, created by Ra. And create means from nothing comes something. I think, and since He's saying, He's using the word bara or create associated with what? Image and likeness. I think our bodies are the made and formed part of us. Our godlike characteristics are the created part of us because no other animals have that. Some people might believe it. You know, you can teach a chimpanzee to talk, but he'll have nothing to say. I mean, you know, he does not have the capability that we have. I believe the human body is the asa, and you know, the made and the formed part of our makeup. And the created part is our godlike characteristics, or our abilities that are, people might say, well, if I don't believe in God, then what are they? I don't know. You can't really believe in them because if you believe everything is physical, then you're kind of at the mercy of the physical laws, like we talked about when we talked about the physical laws. You know, God blessed them and said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it." He gave man his first command. Y'all thought the first command that God gave man was to don't eat the apple. He gave him this one before that. Go forth and replenish your earth. Did He do it? Where are all you biblical scholars out there?
No, He couldn't do it till He had somebody to.
He didn't do it. He did not go out. He had to be chased out, in fact. So this is just a little trivia for you biblical trivia nuts. The first commandment God gave man was, be fruitful and multiply and replenish your earth, which He didn't do. Eventually He did this, but after He had to be told a second time. So the scientists say that mankind came forth from an extremely small population, maybe even one, I don't say it could be one person because we're a sexually reproducing species, so it had to be two. And that's pretty much what the Scriptures say. Now, and it also says that about somewhere a little longer ago than 42,000 years, mankind left this circle you could draw in Ethiopia, where all of the most of the Homo fossils have been found. So he left shortly after. Now I think that the Garden of Eden, I think that was a real place. You can't actually draw. I've got a picture at home where I've drawn from the description in the Bible where it is. And if he was cast out of the Garden of Eden, he was cast into Ethiopia, basically. And so that's where man set up shop, and that's where Cain was born, and the Garden of Eden, if you believe it as a real place. God's finished his step-by-step process of creating a universe, creating an earth, cleaning it up, getting the oxygen in the air, all these things that step by step that we've gone through in the last couple of weeks, just so mankind could live. Now, and God said everything that he had made, and saw everything he made, and behold, it was very good, in the evening and morning were the sixth day. Now, 6 creation days ended. God looked upon his creation and was very satisfied. Now it's time for God to enjoy man and for man to enjoy God. And guess what? Right out of the blocks, man, is disobedient. Now here's the 7th day, which we don't talk much about because there wasn't any creation going on in the 7th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested Shabbath, which is kind of like Sabbath. In fact, it's the root word. On the 7th day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all of his work which God created and made. Shabbath, 7th day. Shabbath means to cease from activity. God didn't have to rest, right? I mean, hey, all he did was create a universe, right? And so he's resting now. There's no evening and morning of the 7th day, you'll notice. So the rest period is continuing, and his next creative act is told over in Matthew, and when Jesus said, I'll go to prepare a place for you. And he'll prepare it just like God prepared the universe, step by step by step. It'll be different than this universe. The ancient scriptures captures accurately what the best science has confirmed only within the last 85 years. We didn't know anything about the Big Bang until Einstein's equations met Hubble's and Lemaitre and Penzias and Wilson and a dozen other guys that helped confirm it. But it's in the Bible. And Moses told us about it 3,500 years ago, by the way. So what is observed in nature must agree with what is written in the Word, since both nature and the Scriptures are revelations of God. See, now that is the assumption that I started with, that what the best science has said and what the Scriptures say, they have to somehow match. Because if you believe God made nature, which I do, and if you believe God wrote the Scriptures, which more and more I'm believing, he did, because, I mean, how could you get a story like that accidentally? I mean, Penzias, Arno Penzias said, he's a Nobel Prize winner, all I got to know about the creation is just look at the Bible, read the first chapter of Genesis. I can tell what happened. And he was one of the guys that verified the Big Bang. The ancient scriptures tell us what science has discovered only within a few decades. All right, here's the punchline. There remains only one question to answer, and I've kind of stayed away from it a little bit. How long was the creation day?